Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when this finds you. Hope you have a great day. If you haven't started, hope you had a great day if you finished. If you have, and if you're still in the midst of it, hope you're having a great day. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention. Excuse me. But, kind of been talking about, what the school system has done to us, what the educational system has done to us, and how it's basically led us into basically a new form of slavery is the best way I can describe it. Because see, we don't have to be led astray if we're already astray. Now, if we're honest with ourselves, school is not education; it's control. School teaches us to sit down for 8 hours a day. School teaches us that we have to ask permission to eat, to speak, to use the restroom. It teaches us when we can sit down, when we can write, when we can get fresh air. And more than anything else, it tells us what to think, not how to think. It never allows us to think for ourselves. Now, is that real education? Schooling and learning are not the same thing. Real education liberates us. Schooling forces us to conform to the dictates of others. See, I always had more life when I studied on my own. I got more excited when I studied on my own. I learned better when I studied on my own. School produces obedience. School has, children wear uniforms. School tells us what time we can go and eat. School provides bus transportation to and from the building. I mean, it looks just like the prison system. I remember some years back, I was riding to a state competition for woodshop with my shop teacher. I was out of school. I was just going on as a chaperone for the most part. And in the process of riding down I-45, between Houston and Dallas, we passed one of the prison buses. And my shop teacher said, well, there goes the new freshman class. And see, the very first thing school teaches us is how to be managed and controlled. The subject matter comes later. Why do you think it's called classroom management? Why do you think most of your elementary school teachers are women? See, most children are already used to taking instructions from women because of their mothers. So the transition is usually seamless from one woman to another. See, I had 0 men teachers in elementary school with the exception of the PE teacher that we had in the 5th grade. And what do those women do in those classrooms? They tell us to sit still, even when our body wants to move. That's why most boys in school are considered unruly, especially at the elementary level. Boys are being forced to go against their natural instincts. It's natural for our bodies to move a bit. It's not natural for our bodies just to sit still. And what do most of us do when we become adults? We take jobs that have us sit still all day. School teaches us to be sedentary. So the school system labeled natural behavior as ADHD. Look at how wicked that system is. You've heard me mention, on some videos from years ago, how I dusted erasers in school. I don't like to sit still, even to this day. Getting out of hospital visits, forcing me to sit still, is one of the hardest things I've had to do. See, had they came out with the label ADHD when I was in school, I would have been labeled ADHD. And they would have tried to put me on drugs to manage my behavior. See, that's what they do when boys don't conform to the teacher's demands. They put them on drugs for them to sit still and be comatose in class. You see, we're taught to memorize and not question anything. You know what school is really doing? It's shaping you into someone that can be used for someone else's benefit, not yours. It rewards those who are obedient. It punishes those who are original. I remember taking art my senior year of high school. And you would think art was a class of free expression, right? Everything we sculpted, everything we drew on paper was assigned to us by the teacher. We weren't allowed to deviate at all. We could come up with our versions of what in our minds of what we wanted to look like, but it had to be what he determined we were going to do. Why didn't he allow us to freely create? So y'all hear me mention woodshop all the time. Why did I love woodshop so much? See, after the initial, I took woodshop in the 7th and 8th grade. Took woodshop I took it. You could only take it 3 years in high school, 1 year beginning, 2 years of advance. But I built a project my senior year, even though I wasn't even in the class. I went to the class after school to build a project. That's just how much I cared about woodshop. So after the initial beginners class, all of us were free to choose what we wanted to make. My shop teacher didn't make us to conform to the same projects. See, outside of the shop class, every other teacher told us there was only one way to solve problems. There was only one way to do problems. There was only one way to get the end result. Who benefits from your conformity? See, we're taught to serve others when in reality we are serving power. And if you think about most people, it was a female teacher who had the most impact on them. See, my high school shop teacher had the greatest influence on me, and it was a man. We still talk and visit with each other to this day. The people the system uses don't have to be evil people. They just have to be effective people. What better way to do it than use the gender that's more nurturing? If teachers came across as cruel, parents would pull their children and immediately would think that school wasn't necessary. So they convince us that school is necessary, and they do it with soft words and sophistication. Why do you think so many educators have problems with the homeschooling movement? They're upset because some parents choose to not place their children inside of those concentration camps. See, I've talked to some educators, and they are literally pissed off because they spent years getting certified, and the homeschool parents don't need paper credentials. And in reality, most of your homeschool students are better prepared for society than public and private school students. And see, y'all have heard me say in the past, had I had children, I would have never placed them in a public school system. You know, some of those educators have even said that the children actually miss social interaction by being homeschooled. Well, some of the worst things I've learned came from classmates. I literally learned where a baby comes from walking home from school in elementary from a classmate of mine and one of my little league teammates. We were in class together and we played football together. See, once you are taught and manipulated, believe what the system promotes is good for you, you're going to do everything in your power to defend it. Why do you think so many people talk negatively about those who don't vote? I mean, if there's one thing that has shown us it doesn't work in our favor, it is voting. People complain about Trump. People complain about Biden. People complain about Obama. People complain about Bush. People complain about Clinton. The same denominator. It's one common denominator. Republican, Democrat, government. It's the same denominator, the same common denominator. Doesn't matter which label they put on it. The only other common denominator is the people who complain, and there are those who represent the system, regardless of which side of the uniparty they belong to. See, the common denominator in the voting process is the voters. The voters and the people they're voting for. It's voters versus government. It's not Democrat versus Republican. It's voters versus government. All of the men I just mentioned belong to the same system. But people keep running out every election thinking they're going to change the system that the system created. We are taught to submit to the system early on. The only right answer that we're taught is the answer in the book, even if that answer is wrong and you find out differently. See, I still remember being in economics class studying economic systems because I was going to the library that was right down the street from my school. And, after disagreeing with my teacher in the class, after the lesson that day, my teacher with her PhD asked, so studying this, what type of economic system do we have? And every one of my classmates said we had a democracy. And I said, what? I said, that's capitalism. The class went off on me, and the teacher went into a dissertation about why I was wrong. I mean, we're literally looking at systems of economics. To this day, I literally don't understand how my classmates came up with democracy as an economic system. So, and after that day in class, I kept looking at the book, reading the book. I went home and looked at some books that I had from the library. I kept some in, that was my senior in high school, so I had my little hoopty, and I would keep books in my car too, kind of like I still do today. And the more I looked at all these books, because I'm trying to figure out how did I get it wrong. But the more I looked, the more I believed my answer. But guess what? I was told I was wrong by somebody with a PhD and all of my peers. I was ridiculed by my peers for being wrong. And when I took my book home to review again, I told myself, I'm right. Because you see, I had already been checking out those books on history, government, economics before I ever got to her class. But I was belittled in front of the whole class because I dared to challenge the system and the white PhD teacher. See, for the most part, school doesn't have to punish you for rebellion. It has trained us to not rebel. That's why the student who challenges the narrative are always labeled as a problem student. Look at what we get taught in school. We're taught history through the lens of the state. Those who plundered and colonized everywhere they've gone. We're taught to count money, but never how money works or how to earn it on our own or how to invest in it properly or how to become business owners. We were taught about Shakespeare. I don't care about Shakespeare. I didn't care about him when I was in class. I didn't know who he was before I got to school. And since I left school, his name ain't escaped my lips other than mentioning him in a video. Why am I learning about Shakespeare? For what? For what purpose? Who cares? They give us career days to steer us in the direction the system wants us to go. Now, as a public speaker, I enjoyed talking to students at career days, but I never told them or talked to them about jobs. I told them how to set goals. I told them how to have good attitudes. I told them how to communicate with others effectively. And guess what? Practically every career day I spoke at, most of the children wanted to come to my sessions because people that were talking about jobs were boring the children. That tells you that as children, our minds are in a whole different place than what the school is grooming us to be. And one time a principal sent the teacher to ask me to come to her office before I left at the end of the day because she wanted to know why her students were gravitating to my talk so much and why were the students leaving my talks and telling their other teachers and their other classmates how excited they were to hear me speak. And I'm not bragging on myself. The principal wanted to know what it was. See, they even have career days at the elementary school level now. Who came up with that stupid idea? I mean, tell me. Who came up with it? But it is to start conditioning the brain very early to conform to the system and seek a job rather than become. Career days are literally telling us we need to seek jobs. We have college days in high school. What's the purpose of that? So we can be further indoctrinated before starting life in debt. I remember one Ivy League school that starts with a D telling me cost shouldn't matter if I wanted a good education. And even as a 17-year-old senior at the time, I thought, well, if they feel that way, why don't they pay for me to come there? You know, the system knows that knowledge in the hands of a free thinker is dangerous to the system. Oh, they do their best to keep us from getting knowledge and just give us schooling. See, what we get in school teaches us to serve the system. It does teach us to serve each other, but it goes back to what I said earlier. It teaches us to serve power, not each other. See, once the system has us for 12 to 16 years, you know, if you go to college, you've internalized the system. You no longer need to be taught what to do. You go apply for a job to work with someone who expects you to already know how you should act, behave, and submit. We learn early how to censor our own thoughts in life. We learn how to be quiet early on in life. We learn how to conform early on in life. We learn how to obey the system early on in life. See, I wish I could count how many times my stepdad got upset with me because of issues I had with what I was being taught at school. See, I wish I could tell you how many times adults told me I challenged authority too much. Instead of allowing us to be individuals, the school system works to shape and govern our identity. It doesn't like individuality. School teaches us to love conformity and servitude. It teaches us to love slavery without the shackles. See, the system teaches us to serve power in a power structure and never our own purpose. See, y'all have heard me mention Miles Monroe many times. Miles Monroe was big on finding and developing your purpose. The first book of his I ever read was the book titled Burden of Freedom. See, my mentor told me about that book years ago. And for years after that, I was on a steady stream of Miles Monroe daily. I remember talking to one of my pastor buddies, you know, about Miles Monroe. Oh, man, I don't do Monroe. I said, oh, okay. I didn't even ask why. And my thoughts are, you know, me and you went to school together. We know each other, you know, but I don't do your style of preaching. So I guess we were equal in that aspect. But when I came across audios and videos, I ate all of that stuff up in Miles Monroe. Matter of fact, I've been, you know, listening to a lot of his audios again recently. And I said, I need to pull down, because I think I probably have almost every book Miles Monroe ever wrote. And I said, I need to go back through those books and look at the stuff I've highlighted just to, you know, kind of refresh myself. See, you can't listen to a steady stream of Miles Monroe and ever go back to the way you thought beforehand. See, we're taught that being successful is getting a job that pays well. We're taught that making our parents proud is more important than living a fulfilled life and finding our own purpose. School suppresses us early on in life. Why are we never encouraged to determine our own success? Why is our success tied to serving the system in a part that part? Well, I don't say part. In a path that we never personally chose. We need to stop mistaking our servitude for success. See, don't wait until most of your life has passed you by and ask, how did I get here? See, the system told us what retirement that retirement is a matter of age, I guess I should say. When in reality, retirement is a matter of economics. What the system does is knock you down when your usefulness is no longer needed or desired. What did plantation owners do to older slaves? They had aged out of their usefulness. The same system that kicks us out at age 65 is the exact same system that lets politicians stay in office well past the age of what they told us is old for the rest of us. I mean, why do we have a president that's almost 80 years old? Why was the previous president almost 80 years old? Why do you have a former Senate majority leader talking about this is her last term, but well into her 80s? Why? And it's all being paid by us. The last two presidents have been geriatric patients. Mitch McConnell can't walk. Nancy Pelosi, Maxine Waters. What? Why? Got some bad news for you. School was never meant to help us. It was meant to help the system. Think about it. Before public school, 96% of the population were business owners, and the 4% were apprentices who were learning how to be business owners themselves. 123 years later, today, the script has been flipped. 90% of the population are employees or unemployed with all of the layoffs, yet we are still promoting this very system. Martin Luther is known as one of the Protestant fathers, but he did something. In 1524, he wrote to German princes urging them to introduce compulsory schooling. Why? He wanted to shape young minds according to the values of the Lutheran Church and using the state to do it. You know what the school is shaped after? The school system in the United States is shaped after the Prussia system of Germany. Where is Prussia? In Germany. It finally took hold in this country in the 18th century. Not in this country. In Germany in the 18th century, under a guy named Frederick William I. He established the first nationwide system of mandatory education for Europe. And what was his goal? He wanted to build an efficient army, an orderly society, a disciplined population. What does America look like? No autonomy was allowed in this system in Europe. The state of Massachusetts was the first state here to adopt the system, and they did that, I believe, around 1852. And by the end of the century, the entire nation, United States, had adopted. See, the General Education Board was created in 1902, just 50 years after that. That's what we now call a public school system. A guy named Frederick Taylor Gates told John Rockefeller that they could produce citizens who would adapt to their social roles and never question them. Another guy named Arthur Schopenhauer, he actually was a guy who actually recognized what they were doing. And he recognized that they were stifling the creative mind before the child had a chance to develop it. And Schopenhauer felt that children should be kept from all of that stuff until around age 16, when they could start kind of thinking on their own. He felt that the only thing that should be taught to children under age 16 were those that were not left to interpretation, like math and science. And even we saw from 2020 to 2024 that science was up for interpretation. But Schopenhauer felt that book sense overrode common sense. I mean, how many people we look and say, "Whoa, they sure are book smart, but they don't have a lick of common sense." See, I know a lot of them. You know, what does school produce? It has produced a mass of mediocre people with surface level knowledge instead of deep thinkers. And I remember reading a book by John Mason some years back, and the title of that book, I believe, was An Enemy Called Average, if I'm not mistaken. How many people do you personally know that you can have long conversations of depth with? See, that's why sports and entertainment are usually the subject areas many people focus on. They can't talk in depth about politics because they focus on personality of the politician. Ask most of them about policy, and the conversation is not going to last long. Think about school. Each day, you move from one topic to the next. Like learning can be fit into a time frame in a box. The Aldous Huxley said the more powerful the mind, I guess I should say. I guess that's what happened when I be just trying to talk off the top of my head. He said the more powerful the mind, the more it will actually incline toward the religion of solitude, I believe. And he said that a person believes things because he's been conditioned to believe them. And I was listening to Jim Rohn the other day, and he said, stop looking for easy tasks, because easy tasks only pay survival wages. And, what he said, I translated it, kind of this way, school teaches us to find a job that pays money. A successful life teaches us to provide value, and the money will flow. And see, Rome said the problem is most people can't think and plan long term because they plan for right now and settle for a raise that doesn't keep up with inflation instead of trying to build something for a long term that could outpace everything they've already been doing. So it goes back to what I said earlier. Sports and entertainment are more important to short-term thinkers. See, Jim Rohn said too many people are looking for applause instead of impact. And I mean, I see it all the time. I've seen it over the years. I remember telling someone years ago, if I share something with you in conversation, you don't have to tell people publicly, I told you that. I don't care about credit. Will what I say be beneficial to the hearer? That's what I'm more concerned about. And, he told me, say, well, you'd be surprised. I've said things to people in the past and didn't mention the name of the person who I was in the conversation with, and they got all bent out of shape saying I'm talking like these were my ideas. But see, I'm not shallow like that. Like a good buddy of mine said, the first time I tell you something, I'm going to mention the name of the person I got it from. The second time, I'll mention, y'all heard me say in the past what such and such said. He said, and the third time I said, like I always say. See, but we've turned over all of our responsibilities to others. We're supposed to educate our children, and we turned it over to the school system. We were supposed to teach our family the Bible. We turned it over to a pastor. We were supposed to feed the hungry and help the poor. We turned it over to government. We were supposed to build businesses and leave our descendants something to build on. We got jobs instead that are owned by others who will leave it to their offspring. We are that company's asset. I'll talk to you later.